Ever dreamt of mastering prompt engineering? You might have been using ChatGPT for various use cases such as writing emails to your manager asking for a leave, or writing love letters to your girlfriend. And often you would be stuck with ineffective responses that you get out of ChatGPT. You can see an example on the screen here. Well, no more. In this particular video, I am going to share 6 secret ingredients used by prompt engineers to make your prompts highly effective, structured, and meaningful. If you're new to the channel, make sure to subscribe to never miss a video. Save this video for later and share it with your friends as well. Now let's continue. For any prompt, whatever prompt that you're going to specify, one of the most basic and most important ideas is the task that you want to solve. Let me show you with an example. Whatever we are going to discuss in this particular video will be through practical examples so that you can relate and understand what I'm talking about and why I'm referring to that, right? And this particular video took a lot of research because I went ahead and experimented with different prompts, and thereby I'm bringing after much effort. So make sure to give it a like if you find it really useful. And also save it for later purposes and don't forget to share with your friends. Now, what I'm talking about with relation to task is task helps a prompt or basically any LLM model decide the objective or decide the outcome for this particular prompt. Say for example, here we write a prompt: investigate the impact of pre-trained language models. Right? Earlier, the same prompt which we provided, right? Pre-trained language models. This is just a basic phrase that we passed to our prompt, and the ChatGPT responded as yes, pre-trained language models like GPT-3 are trained on vast amounts of text data, right? This information is not useful for us, right? This is just a very basic and a very generic information. However, what we are actually looking for is an investigation relating to the impact of pre-trained language models. So here, investigate is our action verb. Always remember to use action verbs and you see the efficacy of the response that you get out of ChatGPT. ChatGPT is a really good tool. ChatGPT or other large language models such as Google Bard, the current Gemini models, but you have to write very effective prompts for it. Now, with relation to this response, we get pre-trained language models like GPT-3 have significantly impacted natural language processing tasks. They excel in this. We get a much more detailed and much more effective response. Some of the examples of tasks or action verbs that you can specify as a task is like summarize, investigate, describe, classify, analyze. This helps your LLM model to decide the course of action. Remember again. Now, the second ingredient that we are going to talk about is the context. Right? When we talk of context, it basically implies the intent. While context in itself it has infinite possibilities, right? The context which you decide for yourself could be very different from the context which I decide for myself. It is very subjective, and therefore I am going to give you a 2-question framework using which you can write an effective context for your prompt. Now let us see an example. Okay, so in the earlier prompt that we specified, just going back, in the earlier prompt we did not specify the purpose or background of investigation. We just said investigate on a particular area. Now, if I specify investigate the impact of pre-trained language models for sentiment analysis, it narrows down the response that I'm going to get. It makes the response much more structured. Let us see the example response that we are getting. So the example response that we get out is pre-trained language models have a substantial impact on sentiment analysis. Here are some key aspects of their influence. So now I'm getting a step-by-step structured response out of ChatGPT just by including the small context within our prompt. The context that we specified was for sentiment analysis. I want to investigate this LLM model for sentiment analysis. This makes it much more structured, right? Now, even on top of this, if you have been following so far and if you find this really effective, now look forward, right? What are the 2 questions that we can ask? What further details we can add to the intent? In in just now what we just added like for sentiment analysis. Now, if we clarify our intent for this particular prompting, intent for this particular discussion, then the other person would very well know that what I'm looking for. This clarifies the nature of output, or basically what does my success look like, right? The other person is just a friendly conversational bot. It does not know how I define my success. So if I tell the model the intent, for example here, the intent of this investigation is to understand and quantify the effectiveness of language models compared to classical machine learning approaches. Now here, make sure you have opened a ChatGPT terminal yourself, ChatGPT portal yourself, and after we have gone through all these 6 ingredients, try out your own prompts and share them in the comments below so that we all know how effective you are able to generate your own prompts and we can learn from each other, right? We now added the intent to our prompt. Let us see the response that we get out of it. Okay. So now the earlier response that we had was with respect to the pre-trained language models, we have a substantial impact on sentiment analysis, and here are some key aspects of their influence, right? And it provided us a step-by-step approach with respect to what are some of the key aspects of the influence of pre-trained models for sentiment analysis. Now, what I have specified my intent that I want to compare and contrast with relation to the other classical machine learning models for sentiment analysis. So now it will help me compare, see how it is working. Feature learning. Pre-train language models by learning contextual representations during training on diverse data. Capture integrate features of language. This is beneficial for sentiment analysis as it allows the model to understand and represent the nuanced expression of sentiment in different contexts. So in terms of feature learning, it helped us. In terms of transfer learning, it again helped us as to how transfer learning can be utilized when we are using a pre-trained language model. So these are just some of the steps. And again, for quantification, it says quantifying the effectiveness often involves comparing metrics like accuracy, precision, recall, and F1 score. Benchmark data sets for sentiment analysis, such as IMDb movie reviews or product reviews, can be used to evaluate the performance. While pre-trained language models generally outperform classical approaches, the choice might also depend on the specific requirements. So it is making a clarification that there are pros and cons, and it again depends on the specific requirements. Okay, so we have a clear picture of what we are trying to investigate and what does our success look like. So our two ingredients, task and context, is very much clear. Now with relation to context, I said that I'll give you a 2-question framework that will help you narrow down your context, because context in itself can have infinite possibilities. So what are the 2 questions that you need to ask? And make sure to note it down, right? Make sure to note it down or take a screenshot here. Ask, what does success look like? I need to ask myself, what does my success look like? So when I'm investigating, my success here would look like a comparative study between X and Y, between classical models and pre-trained models. Second, what is the intent of the query, which we very well specified that my intent is to compare and contrast, right? So these are the 2 primary question frameworks that will help you narrow down your context. So far, I think you're here with me, right? Please stay tuned. This will be a little context conceptual as well. At the same time, we are trying to keep it more practical so that you can apply in your varied tasks that you go ahead in day-to-day lives, right? The third thing that, or the third primary ingredient to talk about here is the persona. Persona is very, very, very crucial, right? I'll show you with an example. I will not talk much about here. Rather, I'll show you an example and you can decide for yourself. Let us take this example. Okay. Narrate a story about rabbit and tortoise. So ChatGPT, it's a very famous story. Let me know in the comments if you have heard about this story or not, right? In this class 1 or 2, we often in class 1 and 2, we hear about this story between tortoise and a rabbit. So in this particular story, it narrates, the moral of the story is primarily that slow and steady wins the race. And that is how we are approaching the learning process. So if you just read over to this story, I'll just zoom out a bit so that you can clearly see the picture here. You clearly read through the story. Read through this story on the left and then read through the story on the right. Tell me which of the 2 stories is more effective, right? Tell me clearly. With the thumbs up, you can clearly indicate which of the 2 stories here is much more effective. Now, what is the difference between these 2 stories, right? You would ask. In the first story, we just said that we want a story about rabbit and tortoise. In the second story, we specified that you are Steve Harvey from the famous TV show. Narrate a story about the rabbit and tortoise. The same thing, but we added a persona to our ChatGPT. So adding this persona helps you craft much more effective and much more interesting articles, much more interesting emails, or even when you are going for various research purposes, you can say that you are a helpful research assistant like we did it here. Let me show an example. You are an experienced AI research assistant. Your task is to investigate the impact of this, whatever earlier we talked about, right? So when we said that you are an experienced AI research assistant, what it did, it went ahead and talked about research. Okay, it talked about the advantages of pre-trained language models. It then quantifying effectiveness in the form as to how a researcher would explain things. Again, it brought it down into considerations and challenge. If you look at any research paper, there will be abstract, there will be background, there will be advantages, disadvantages, and there will be quantifiable effectiveness. So the similar structure is being followed here. So we learned about the three ingredients so far. Keep account with me, right? We talked about task, we talked about context, and we talked about persona. The fourth that we are going to talk about is the tone. Let me show you. The tone is primarily useful in writing emails, stories, poetry. So primarily for content generation, this tone is very useful. Even when you are writing emails, you can specify that write a professional email or write a friendly email to a friend. Or when you're creating, say you're writing a love letter using ChatGPT. So you can say that I want the tone should be romantic, right? This is how you set the tone. Let me show an example. So again, from the famous Steve Harvey show, what we are trying to narrate is you are Steve Harvey from famous TV show, narrate a story about the rabbit and tortoise, maintain a route tour. Nothing against the famous Steve Harvey. I really adore him. Just I wanted to show you and make things a little interesting. So I added a tone which is a little rude here. Okay, just read through the story. Again, I'll zoom out to help you read through the entire story and you can yourselves compare and contrast the difference. Now, the fifth ingredient, which is very effective for any ChatGPT prompt or prompt for any other large language model, is specifying the format of output. Here, for example, if you can see in the screen here, let me zoom this a bit. Our earlier prompt was, you are an experienced AI research assistant. Your task is to investigate the impact of pre-trained language models for sentiment analysis. The intent of this investigation is to quantify and compare the effectiveness of pre-trained language models compared to classical machine learning approaches. Now let us see the difference that I specified. I'll just zoom the screen a bit so that you can see it clearly. So the difference that we specified here is the structure. Structure the response as a research thesis. Just by providing this structure, the instruction relating to the structure for the model, what we get is the output in the form of a research thesis. You see, research thesis investigating the impact of pre-trained language models on sentiment analysis, and we get in the form of a clear thesis structure. So you see how effective we can build our prompts just by taking care of these little ingredients into our prompts, right? Now, the final and the last ingredient that we are going to talk about, this is also very effective, and in fact this has been proved to be one of the most effective so far in terms of comparing all the other ingredients that you provide. Even if you don't provide any other ingredient and just talk about this particular ingredient, then your prompts are going to be really effective, and I'll show you with an example. Just if you want to read through this, I'll just scroll down through this entire result that we got, right? I'll slowly scroll this down. So if you want to read, just pause and take a glance, right? Or let me zoom this a little bit more. Right. Yes. So now the final ingredient is providing examples. This is also known as few shot prompting. You must have heard about few shot prompting. This particular ingredient is basically the case of few shot prompting, wherein instead of telling the model what to do, show the model some examples of what the input looks like and what the output should be. The model will very well take care of everything else that you want to add. That doesn't mean that our other ingredients are not effective. Other ingredients are very effective and are very powerful. Just by adding examples to all these other five ingredients, you will have a very effective and very strong prompt that you cannot even think of. Just go ahead and I want you to try it down. And that is why I have provided a separate example here. Just try to put an example yourself in our existing prompts and see the responses. Put your responses down in the comments and